Right, what is up YouTube? This is a little tutorial video about how I edit 360 footage. I'm going to show you how I made the clip at the beginning, which was shot at Strawberries and Cream Festival on this, which is the Insta360 1X camera. I had quite a few people sending me messages about this effect, so I thought I would go deep down inside the After Effects file and show you exactly what's going on. Let's do this. So here we are in the Insta360 Studio software. This is a free download. You can get this online. If you've got the Insta360, you're probably already using this. What I have done is I have loaded up a bunch of the clips from the festival. What you're going to do is you're going to find the clips you want to use. You can use this to preview them. As a default, they come in with this kind of tiny planet effect, which is cool. But actually for this, we don't want that. We want them to be in the kind of flat view, or the sort of unfolded version, which looks like this. And then you've got a couple of options as to how you're going to process them before you start editing them. What you can do is you can use the export button up here, but I actually wouldn't do that because I don't like when they come out as an H.264 file. I think it's much easier to work with them if they're ProRes. So I'm actually going to export them as ProRes, and I'll show you how to do that next. So I'm going to jump into Premiere now, and basically what I've done is I've brought in all the shots from the festival that I wanted to use, and when you import them, they will naturally come in this kind of unfolded flat view, which is what we want. So yeah, this is the shot that we were just looking at, the kind of time lapse of this bike sculpture thing. And then what you can do is you can kind of assemble a sort of basic edit. You can kind of work out what shots you want to use. You can trim out the sections that you want. You could even start to sort of assemble it with some music. This is a shot of Josh Denzel on stage with the camera. It looks kind of funny like this. So yeah, much easier to work with it in Premiere because you can sort of work out kind of what your edit's going to look like. Pull out the clips that you want to use, and then we're going to take them into After Effects, and that's where we're going to do all of the real editing. So I've got this little timeline here called 360 Selects. I'm going to export that by pressing Command M. And you can see here, this is like sort of my 3 minutes and 14 of selects that I might use for this edit. And the reason we're going to export as ProRes is because that, by default, the camera I think is H.264, maybe H.265, which is quite a heavy compression. And because we're going to be doing quite a lot of editing on top of this, the computer has to do a lot of work to process the kind of compressed frames. So if we turn it to a ProRes file, ProRes is much like sort of lighter compression. ProRes is designed to work on Mac, and it's much easier to edit the footage if it's in a ProRes format, especially considering the file's going to be quite big. You can see here it's 5,760 pixels wide. So we want to make this as easy as possible for the computer, so that's why I would default to rendering everything out in ProRes. So what would I use? I would use 422HQ. If you don't know the difference between HQ and LT, HQ stands for high quality, LT stands for light. So the slightly more compression in the light version, slightly less compression in the HQ version. So we may as well keep it as high quality as possible. And then we will do that, and then we will export. Cool, so here we are in After Effects. This actually right here is the timeline of the finished product. So this is the edit that I put up on Instagram. You can see that it is, well, it's the wrong way around. I'm not sure why. I think I started off making it this way, and then as you'll see this process, it's going to be quite difficult to sort of rotate it 90 halfway through. So I just ran with it. If that's annoying, then I apologize, but that's just the way that this is. Anyway, this here is the file that we've just exported out of Premiere. So this is basically all of the footage that we want to work with. It hasn't been chopped down into the edit yet. We haven't really worked out exactly what parts we're going to use. And then if we come back into the main comp here, you can see all of these different layers. I'm just going to turn this off for now. All of these different layers are the individual clips that I've chosen, and I've kind of assembled my edit like here. What we're actually going to do is we're just going to look at one or two of these transitions individually, and then hopefully you'll get an understanding of how the whole thing comes together, because it's pretty much just using the same technique over and over again. Although the transitions all do look completely different and they are individual, the actual processes involved, it's very much the same each time. So I'm just going to show you how we get from this clip into this one, and then into this one. And that, I think, will give you a good understanding of everything. Anyway, so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to make a new comp. Let's just do composition, new composition, and we will call this tutorial. And then what I think is important is actually making this the size of your finished product to the very start. So if we're going to do this for Instagram, we'd want to make it 1080 by 1350, which is the maximum size for Instagram. And then duration, let's just make it 25 seconds long. 25p, yep, that should do the job. So first things first, let's just take this clip because we're going to need that. So I'm going to Control C that and then open up my tutorial comp, Control V. Go back into here, we're going to need this clip. So Control C that, bring it into a new comp. And then finally, I think that's this layer here, Control C, Control V that. Yeah, cool. So we've got our 3 layers and let's just layer them up in the same way that they were before. This one goes in the middle. Obviously, first things first, you'll notice that this clip seems to be upside down. Not sure why. And they're also completely the wrong size and shape. If I zoom out, you can see how big this is compared to the tiny little Instagram frame that we've got here. But that's okay, I'm going to show you exactly how to deal with this. And the first thing is you're going to need to get a plugin for this. None of this stuff will work without the free GoPro VR reframe plugin. So if you just Google GoPro VR reframe, you'll see a heap of tutorials about how to use this plugin. Loads of people have done it. And then download GoPro. But yeah, so click on this link here. I'll put this in the description as well. Come down here and then you're going to hit download for Windows, download for Mac, download the plugin, install it, and then you'll be ready to rock. And kind of the key to this whole effect is the way that we use this plugin. So we're not actually going to apply it to each of the individual clips. What we're going to do is we're going to apply it to an adjustment layer. So I'm going to go new adjustment layer. And straight away it creates this new adjustment layer, which you can see is the same size and the same shape as your composition here, which is also quite important. And then we're going to search for GoPro VR reframe. And you can see that that's just appeared in the effects and presets panel up here. So drop that in. And now we have the tools that we need to start manipulating and adjusting the footage and doing all of the kind of cool, funky 360 stuff that we want to do. But I think you'll be able to see straight away that this isn't what we want. We've got this kind of weird line in the center here and everything isn't looking as cool and as crispy as it did in this one here. So the reason for that is because the base footage is not the same size as the composition. This will only work if the base footage is the same size as the composition. And you can do it, it's interesting to say, you can do this on literally any size and shape of composition. If I wanted to do this for YouTube, say, I made it 16 by 9, or if I wanted to do it full story, Instagram story, and I made it 9 by 16, you could do that. You just need to make sure that your 360 footage is exactly the same size and shape as your composition layer and as your adjustment layer, which would sit on top. So how are we going to do that? Right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to right click and I'm going to go transform and then fit to comp width. Cool, so that's done half of the job for us, but we haven't done the height yet. So I've got a little trick for this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go and hit S, which brings up scale, and I can see straight away that 18.8% is what we need for the width. But the height, which is this value here, is not going to be 18.8. So I'm going to go transform, fit to comp height, and we can see that needs to be 46.9. So this was 18.8. Cool, so there we go. So now that fits perfectly in the comp size. And now if I toggle on the GoPro VR reframe layer, you can see that we have our tiny planet the way that we want it to be. And there's none of those weird lines and stuff. Cool, so now we're in a position to start sort of manipulating and moving around these parameters here. You've got FOV, which is field of view, and that's basically like how zoomed in and out we are. And then you've got pitch, roll, and yaw, which are the 3 angle transformations that enable us to look around in any direction and sort of manipulate the image to do what we want. Anyway, so you can mess around, you can play around, you can sort of start moving these things to see what you like and see what looks cool. There isn't really any trick to this other than just finding one that looks good. Every single 360 shot is going to be completely different. It's going to come out with the camera pointing in a different direction. You're going to be wanting to look at a different thing. So if I was to tell you what the numbers I've used in this edit and then you try and apply it to your footage, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't look cool. So this is just a game of trial and error. So now I've got these 3 clips and they are all the size and the shape of the composition, which is what I need for this to work. And then if you see, basically the key to this whole effect is that because the VR reframe effect is applied on an adjustment layer above all of these individual layers, the movement of the camera will end up being kind of seamless and continuous across these different clips. And that's why you get these really cool transitions that just seem to sort of blend from one shot into the next. What do I mean by that? Well, okay, let's take a look at how we're going to create one of these transitions. So what I've got here is the yaw, pitch, and the roll in sort of a specific position which looks good for this shot. So I'm going to keyframe that by pressing the little stopwatch icon here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit U on the keyboard and that brings up the keyframes that I've just created. I'm also going to keyframe the FOV there because that's something that we might want to change. And then we're going to go sort of into our next shot here which is this one, and we're going to find a view that we like here as well. So this is kind of cool with the record there. So this is basically, like I said, this is just about adjusting things, making things kind of look the way that you want them to. There isn't really any science to it. It's also incredibly frustrating because you'll move one parameter and then the whole thing will shift, and then you'll be like, oh no, how do I get it to the place that I want it to be? And it's really difficult. There isn't really a trick, to be honest. I'm just trying to line this up so that the little camera kind of stand is exactly in the center here. And I'm actually going to zoom out a bit as well, so we get the whole thing in. Yeah, that's kind of cool. I quite like that. So now, if I go to the beginning and I play these shots through, and this is the magic of this technique, because what's going to happen is it's just going to seamlessly go from one shot to the next. So let's take a watch of that. Yeah, I mean, it's not anywhere near as cool as the transitions that I've done before, but you can see how it blends from one to the next. So one of the first things you want to do is you want to smooth these keyframes out, because linear keyframes are not going to look very nice on this. So I would select all of them, and then I would hit Function F9. And that's what that's going to do, is that's going to ease the keyframes, and it's just going to mean the transition is much, much more smooth. But what I probably want to do is I want to do this to all of the keyframes at once. So I'm actually going to right click, and I'm going to go keyframe velocity, and then I'm going to go outgoing. Let's speed that up to 50. And that's just going to mean that all of those handles get stretched a bit, and it's going to go sort of a bit quicker in the center. Let's try 50 going in on that side as well. So now if we watch this, it should go, yeah, a little bit faster. You can see that our keyframe handles here, they've been stretched and they've been pulled out, which means that our sort of transitional period here is a little bit steeper. First thing I noticed is that this shot is not the right way round. We want it to look like that when it's in its final position. So I'm just going to try and rejig that. We've got our two clips here. We've got this one, and it sort of slowly blends into this one. And straight away you can see that this isn't exactly the same transition that we had in the original clip here. And I think the reason for that is just because this was 90 degrees the other way round. It becomes quite difficult to create the same movements, just because of the fact that you're trying to juggle three different parameters here. But what we can do is we can try and create a camera move that kind of feels equally cool and kind of quirky. And I think that's pretty cool there. So what's important to look at in this is the graph editor here, because we can see straight away that this property, which is the pitch, is doing a lot of movement compared to the other ones. It's actually going all the way from 0 at 28 degrees to up here 1 at 88 degrees. So it's doing a full rotation, which is what this 1 times at the beginning means, and 88 degrees. And the cool thing about the 360 cameras is that if I get rid of that 1, I just make that 0. This completely changes what it looks like on the graph editor, but the actual image stays completely the same. And the reason for that is because we've just done a complete 360 revolution. It doesn't make any difference to the final result. It just means getting there, we're going to do one less full turn. So if I play that, you can see, oh, that's kind of back to where we started. It's like a boring and laborious kind of slow move, whereas we actually want something that's much more exciting. And that's why it's kind of cool to mess around with these numbers at the beginning, because you can see that, you know, if I get rid of the 1 here, put that at 0, it's still the same thing. We're going to end up with the same part of the shot that we want, but this is going to do a much more exciting move to get there. So let's watch that. Yeah, that's kind of cool. That's getting closer. I think what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to put that 1 back in again into the pitch. And I think with those two things combined, we'll end up with a really cool dynamic move. Or maybe that's a bit too much. So it's a balance. So it's basically just a juggling act. You're trying to come up with a movement that looks cool, that's not too over the top, but does look kind of seamless. So all I can say really is you just have to mess around with these parameters. You just have to kind of try juggling this. You have to try adding some extra numbers at the beginning. Because I'll say it again, the number at the beginning doesn't affect what the shot looks like. It just affects the number of rotations that you have to make to get there. So I could put -5 in here. You know, this is going to shoot all the way down to here, but it will still be the same thing at the end, but we're going to have some weird trippy movement to get there. Oh, okay, let's not do that. Let's try that. I think this is going to be a nice move for this. Yeah, that's kind of cool. It's kind of smooth. I think actually the transition takes a little bit too long. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring these keyframes and put them a bit closer together. So select all of those, move it that way. Select all of those, move it that way. Let's just see how that comes out. So that's a bit nicer. It's a bit quicker, I think. I'm also going to go back into my keyframe velocity, right click, keyframe velocity, and I'm going to speed that up to 75%. And then incoming velocity on this side as well, we're going to go 75% as well. 75%. And if we take a look at our graph, you can see now much steeper curves. So we've got this real slow move and then we go whoosh straight into it. Let's take a look at that. I think also what we're doing is we're losing the first clip a bit too early. I think it disappears. What we want is the transition to happen when the camera's moving at its quickest. So if I go here and I take a look, probably about there, that's when we've got the most change happening on these graphs. So I'm going to make that dissolve or that fade out right there. And I think this will be the smoothest transition that we can get. Yeah, that's pretty good, isn't it? Nice. Okay, I'm happy with that transition. Like I said initially, it's not exactly the same as this one. I obviously spent a bit long kind of fine tuning and tweaking the parameters to make this exactly what I wanted. But this is just a quick kind of insight as to how I made that effect and what you could do. I'm sure you can see that if you just kept messing around, you could end up with something that was a lot more pleasing. Let's just take a look at doing another one of these transitions then. So the next clip we have is this time lapse. And in fact, they look really similar. The transition is actually really good because of the way that I think the camera was on the same tripod. So it's the same height, which means that the sky is pretty much exactly the same level. And you end up with this really cool kind of like sphere of sky in the center, which makes it great for these transitions because you can seamlessly blend from one to the other without anyone really noticing the transition happen. So let's take a look at what we can do here. Let's find a cool frame. What I'm going to do actually is I'm going to duplicate these keyframes, Control-C, Control-V. So this ends up staying in the same place throughout the duration of this shot. So for this transition, I'm going to try something a bit different. We're going to go from this kind of, let's call it like a looking down a pipe view to the sort of traditional tiny planet view. And I think the kind of traditional tiny planet view looks a little bit like this. Cool, so let's just try throwing in that transition, going from, so that was just the yaw that I adjusted there. Again, you're just messing around with the keyframes to see what does the thing that you want it to do. And we're doing that as we're transitioning from this shot into this shot. So let's have a look at that. That's pretty cool. I like that. I think that we are a little bit too zoomed in at this stage, so I'm going to zoom out just a bit more. I want to see the whole of that sculpture. That's good. Maybe I'll add a bit of tilt as well, or just center it up like that. Cool, so let's take a look at that. Yeah, so it's a really smooth transition. You wouldn't necessarily notice that the shot had changed at all because of the way that the horizon stays in the same place. So let me just speed up that transition as well. I think we're going to put the keyframes a little bit closer together, like we did before. Nice. And I think that I need to just change the keyframe velocities, yeah, because you can see the slope of this is much steeper, whereas here it's much more smooth, much more linear, which is not what we want. So right click on that, keyframe velocity, outgoing 75, which is what we used before. Right click on all of them, keyframe velocity, incoming 75, and then we'll watch that. There we go, and we've got that cool kind of whip around transition, which I think I used quite a lot in the main edit. That works really well. Cool, I'm happy with that. You might notice that I'm not easing the field of view. You can do. I don't think that the field of view is actually making that much difference to the kind of overall aesthetic and the overall feel. It's just a slow zoom in and a slow zoom out. So yeah, I'm happy not to ease that. I don't think it makes much difference really. Cool, so we've got our edit there. And then what I might do is I might then just do a final rotation 180 degrees of this final clip so we can see the S&C at the bottom. Let's try that. Maybe we'll zoom out even more so we see this guy's head. Oh no, doesn't seem to have a head. Okay, that's all good. Nice. So we've got a nice little move there. Let's go back to our main edit and we'll take a look at the keyframes that I've used in this. So I'm going to hit U to bring up all of the keyframes, and you can see I've done quite a lot of different points. Basically what I've done is I've picked these kind of key views that I want, and if you go onto the graph editor here, you can see that at each one of these points, the movement is, there is no movement. It's pretty much exact. It's almost static. It's always static at these points, which basically just means the camera moves quickly and then it ends up at one of these kind of views that I've decided. And then the transition occurs as it goes into the next static kind of freeze frame. And I think that's pretty much the only way to do it. I think if you were to start moving the different properties and trying to keyframe them all independently to do really complex movements, you just get stuck. I would say take the clip that you want, keyframe the view that you want, and then keyframe the next one and just see how the transition looks without doing anything funky at all. Because sometimes it comes out pretty well. And then if the transition's not looking as exciting or not looking as fun as you want it to, then you can go into your graph editor and you can try adding a couple of extra rotations. So you can see here, going from here to here, you know, we've got like a whole extra spin. So if we're looking at our yaw property, it goes from minus 94 degrees to minus 2, the whole revolution. So I could definitely have that as being -1 or even 0, and it would be exactly the same view, but obviously the transition wouldn't look as cool. So let's take a look at that and let's see why I've done that. So yeah, the transition's pretty awful if we do it like that, but if we make that -2 like it was before, we get these kind of extra spins. And this is a nice little trick as well, because you can kind of hide a transition that maybe doesn't work that well. So we're going from kind of daytime here into evening time, and we're going from being out in the field to being on stage. So the reason that I need to put a couple of extra revolutions in there is just because that kind of hides this transition. So that's pretty much all there is to it, really. You just want to find these key views that you like the look of, keyframe them in all the different positions, and then just go to the next one, keyframe that, and then just see how it looks as you make the transition between the two shots. And then finally, I'm just going to show you how I made this thing into a continuous loop. So if I play it from the end here, we come back to this first clip, and then you can see we're back at the beginning again. So all I did for that is, you know, these are the keyframes that we used at the very, very, very beginning. So I literally just copied and pasted them and put them at the very end as well. And I made sure that, you know, the part of the clip that we were using is this section here. So that is it. That is how I created this effect. So I'm just going to show you how I kind of finished this off and the other things that I did. So what I did is I rendered this all out as a ProRes file again, and that is here, 360 render 5. So we just play that. You can see this is the whole thing. You can also see that I've added a little bit of blur. I added a plugin that I've got, which is called Real Smart Motion Blur, RSMB. It's really good. What it does is it just creates an authentic camera motion blur. So for shots like this, and when we've got these kind of dynamic transitions, we want a bit of blur. We want to feel like the camera's really swinging around. So that's why I use RSMB. There is an After Effects version, which is, I think it's called Pixel Motion Blur. So you can try dropping that on and seeing how that affects what your image looks like. Because if we just go back to the edit here, you can see that these transitions feel very sharp. It doesn't really feel like the camera's whipping around. So that's why I like to use a bit of motion blur, because it makes it seem more realistic to me. I'll put a link in the description as to where you can get RSMB. It's not a particularly cheap plugin, but it is very cool if you do a lot of stuff like this. If not, the Pixel Motion Blur is probably going to be okay for you as well. Anyway, so we've got that. We've got our full render. The only other thing that I wanted to do to this is I wanted to remove some of these things. So you can see here, we left our bags in the center, and this is where the tripod that was holding the camera was. And in quite a few of the shots, you can see the tripod. Here, for example. So I really don't like that. I think that looks awful. So what I actually used is the After Effects Content Aware Fill, which is a new feature that's been brought into After Effects in the last year or so. I'm not going to do a tutorial on this, so if you want to learn how to use it, find it somewhere else. There's plenty of tutorials out there. But I will show you the composition that I made. So here we go. So yeah, so this is the fill layer that was generated. And as you can see, I can toggle that on and off, and you can see it just sits on top of the bags and the rucksacks, and it completely masks them. It's a really cool effect, and it works really well on this. And it just makes the whole thing look so much more seamless, I think. And then the other thing that I added, just to bring this out and make this all a bit more exciting, is the Chromatic Aberration. So this is where you're splitting up the different colors. Again, if the camera was swinging around and it was moving really quickly, you wouldn't end up with a nice sharp image. You'd probably end up with kind of like smears and smudges, a bit like this. So you can see here the reds and the blues and the yellows are kind of separated. And the way that I do that is with a plugin called Quick Chromatic Aberration. So I'll drop a link in the description to that one. That is a free plugin. And I always use it when I'm doing a transition because I just think it makes it look more realistic. If I turn that off, you probably wouldn't even notice. I'm not sure why I've applied 2 versions of it here. I might just delete one of them. I think we only need 1. So that's it. This is the finished video. We've got everything we need. We have our cool transition. We've got our fill layer. So I'm going to render that out again as a ProRes file, and I'm going to bring it into Premiere. I'm going to show you the kind of final finishing touches that I did to make this whole video come to life. Cool. So here we are in Premiere, and this is actually the final timeline for the final edit. There's not much to say about this really, because all I've done is I've added some sound effects layers, which are down here, and a bunch of color correction layers as well. So if I just toggle all this stuff off, you can see this is what the clip looks like without grade. This is some color correction. And then this layer here, this is just some sort of noisy film stuff that I put on the top just to make it feel a bit more vintage and a bit cooler. So let's just take a look at the whole thing with all of these layers together. And that is it. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope it made sense. If you've got any questions, please just shout in the comments and I'll do my best to answer. And definitely hit subscribe because I've got a bunch of other tutorials that I'm going to do very soon and you wouldn't want to miss out.